Thank you, SOUPS 2020. Thank you to the session chair, Lori Cranner. Thank you to Sonia. Thank you to Heather, the general chair and the vice chair. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. I'm going to be speaking on maybe we have been doing this wrong. Protester as persona. I'm so lucky to be able to work with Ford Foundation in their fight against inequality. We support organizations and individuals who are making a huge impact on a global level. I'm going to go into this idea of protester as persona, and obviously these are my words, not those of my employer, but I feel like we're aligned in this idea that to fight inequality and to support people, we need privacy, we need great user research, we need security, but also we need to understand the unique needs of the people who surveillance and attacks against privacy and security happen to the most. Things I want to cover are usable and practical security and privacy and how that affects people on the margins, people who've been pushed to the margins, not because they have a choice. And I think it's important for us to address the forces that push them there and how it affects privacy and security. I'm going to speak about my personal experiences, my lived experience, my professional experience working with marginalized communities, not just here in the United States where I'm based, but also throughout the world. Marginalized communities have a unique security and privacy needs, and there are different issues that affect those things, and we want to go into that. What if the way that we've been addressing privacy and security could use let's just say an infusion of different thinking, and I think most of that should be based on the idea that for there to be privacy, right, a person needs to have agency, and I think that's an important thing to start and talk about. Looking at current events and current affairs, what's going on globally, locally, domestically, wherever you're sitting, and thinking how much of this affects the work that I do, how much of this affects my work, my research on privacy, on security. And if it doesn't have a large impact to the work we're doing, maybe we're doing this wrong. Where I am in the United States, we're looking at nationwide uprisings and protest against police brutality. There's a large movement, the movement for Black Lives, and we're also dealing on a global level with a pandemic that the likes of which we've never seen and have impacted so many different people, not just on a personal level, interpersonal level, but governments and affecting people's autonomy and people's agency. So if the work that we're doing on privacy and security is the same work we'd be doing if this was a year ago, then something's wrong, right? And if not now, what better time to pause and think about the work that we're doing and how maybe by approaching it differently, we can have a larger impact and probably protect those who need it most. Surveillance, right, and other tools against privacy, pushing against an individual's privacy, pushing against a system's privacy, those are tools of oppression, right? It's always been a tool and tools of oppression. But it's also important to remember that these things are not metered out evenly. These tools of oppression, surveillance, and other things that harm, try to take away privacy, whether on an individual level or on a systematic level or electronic level, these things affect certain communities, certain individuals, certain identities more than others. And if we're not addressing that, then we need to start over, or at least bring in some additional thinking to the work that we do. We know that if you identify as a woman and you're on the internet, you're one of the most targeted groups on the internet. You're going to have a completely different experience on the internet. And there have been countless experiments of people changing their profiles, changing their names, and noticing the behavior that they, with the exact same content that they would, that they would have, the exact same background they would have, the exact same accreditations that they would have. But the internet's a different place. It's a more harmful place. It's a more abusive place. And it's a place where security is something that you really need, right? And it's a place where privacy is something that you're really craving as a way to protect yourself. I'm going to talk about some of the work I do and some of the work I do with marginalized communities, as well as go into how the audience that's attending this talk and the participants to this talk can use certain tools, certain research, certain content to assist them in making their tools, making their research, making the work that they do even more safe and secure, right? And assisting people even better. And what's that look like? I've been working for many years now on a project that I founded called CryptoHarlem. And I remember it was during the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman court proceedings that I started thinking, what can I do? What can I do to make an impact? What can I do to support my community around myself here in Harlem? And I thought, you know what? I'm a computer hacker. I'm an operational security person. I'm someone who trains people. Maybe I can reach out to the community around me. So step one, I think, was just like, this is my skill, this is my approach, but let me see how I can take the work that I do and apply it to the issues facing a marginalized community. Now, in this case, it was the Black community in America and the Black community in Harlem. And of course, I'm Black, so I thought, okay, that makes the most sense. Let me find a community center. Let me find a low barrier entry for that community to engage with them. Let me listen to folks. Let me hear what their concerns are. And then once I speak with them, I can have a better understanding on how to apply these thinking and support them in learning about surveillance, learning about all the different things that affect their safety, security, and privacy. And it was great. I think, like, for a lot of people, they had questions about when I wake up in the morning and I see these devices around me in my community, hanging on light poles or aimed at me in where I live or in my neighborhood, but I don't see them in other places. Like, what are these devices? What's the hardware involved? What's the software involved? How did it get there? What can I do to have more control, have more agency on my privacy, on my security, and things like that? And that's what we talked about at these events that I held called Crypto Harlem. And Crypto Harlem is still going in the age of COVID-19. Of course, now we're a live stream. Crypto Harlem is focused on teaching security, privacy, and circumvention to the community of African Americans living in Upper Manhattan, in Harlem. Crypto Harlem also works in other Black communities whenever we can, as well as online, to make sure that people have a strong understanding of their unique privacy and security needs, and also things that they can do to safeguard them. And it's, through that work and the work I've done traveling, working with folks, keeping them digitally safe, digitally secure, dissidents and human rights defenders, it's really helped me a lot in understanding the unique needs that these folks have and how much we fail them, but not intentionally, right? But with good intention, sometimes without a lack of analysis, we can easily fail folks. What I would another thing that I found was a lot of people didn't have a background, a strong understanding on this identity of Black folks and what the privacy and security concerns are. But the good thing is there's quite a lot of literature on it. And so I think, like, one of the first things is, understanding that privacy and security and those things are needed by some groups more than others, right? But also, like, the way that it is thought about, right? The culture behind it might be unique and different, so it's worth understanding. One way is through research. And I would say, for folks who are interested in working with my community, Simone Brown has a book called Dark Matters. It talks about the history of surveillance of Black folks. And, I find that a lot of people just don't have that full academic knowledge of surveillance. And it is an important, powerful tool, is understanding the history against privacy, the history of these things when we're trying to solve it, right? Trying to make things better. I think it's so important to understand the history of surveillance, the history of things that go against our uses of technology in a free, private, and secure way. Another great piece of literature, it was Sophia Amoja Noble's Algorithms of Oppression. I would definitely recommend that to folks if you want to read that book. It talks about surveillance capitalism. It spends a lot of time talking about search engines and the effects on communities, and also this idea that these are, you know, public works and even and fair when that's not exactly how these tools work. I think there's a misunderstanding among the public, and these kinds of books allow people to really raise their thinking and understanding. And as researchers, as people who work with user experience, right, user research, developers, and security experts, it behooves us to understand these things and to have at least some body of knowledge on marginalized groups, on the privacy and security of marginalized groups. I had a friend who reached out to me and said, "Hey Matt, I know you work with a lot of different groups and you direct people to a secure application for voice and messaging called Signal." And I was like, "Yeah, I love Signal. It works really great. I talk to people about it all the time." My friend said, "Well, listen, I'm working with survivors of abuse and domestic abuse shelter, and I can't figure out how to block calls and text messages from people, right? People in your contacts. What has happened is these people have blocked the contacts of the individuals who are harassing and abusing them. But by installing the Signal app, they were somehow allowing them back in. And there wasn't a way on Android to block these, which is what the device that many of these people had. There wasn't a way to block contacts from contacting you. And I was like, wow, I can't believe this happened. And this isn't a bug that was of ill intent of the developers of Signal, but they didn't keep in mind that there are some people who need certain resources, certain features for their very survival, right? And these are small things that we can do to enhance privacy and security that when we leave out have a very, very large impact, a negative impact to a marginalized community. So now, if obviously through many updates and changes, this is now a feature that exists in the application, but at the time it did not. And to go out the door without thinking about that was a mistake. And I think that it's just things like this that we have to be able to think about and realize, like, look, if we have a way for people to communicate in any kind of tool or allow users to speak to each other in any kind of system, we also have to have a way where that user is empowered to block and protect. Give them a door, give them curtains, give them privacy and safety. Looking at the protest inside the United States, there are needs of protesters, of demonstrators who are, following the tradition of civil disobedience, following the tradition of marching for what they believe is right. In the United States, we have protest, and the protesters and demonstrators are following a tradition in the United States, just trying to let their voices be heard, which is such a powerful and important part of any democracy. Tech companies, though, are being asked for information and will you work for, right, the unique needs of protesters. Foursquare, a geolocation app, said, we'll do our best to protect the geolocation information and privacy of protesters, right? And that also means that we'll have to resist requests from law enforcement that we feel do not have bearing, or our legal team has found like don't meet the criteria, right, for us to get involved. And that's an important thing for any software development organization, for any programmers, developers, or companies, is to say, what are we doing to protect folks who are using our technologies for social justice, to fight inequality? I was a contributor to a project that I really enjoyed, and I feel like it's a step in the right direction. It was a diverse team, majority of whom were people of color, and of that group, a majority of were women. And it was a user experience checklist, and there's all these thinkings and questions and ideas that are so important to add to user research, but it's also not naturally part of how someone might approach that work. So it's easy to skip a step. And that's something that I heard from this team I was meeting with at Access Now's RightsCon in Brussels many years ago. And what we had done is we were like, okay, let's think about this. What are ways to address this? So I chimed in and said, you know what? In the security world, we use checklists a lot for things that are important to make sure that we don't skip things and are manageable, right? And so they took their research and their thinking and this idea of checklist, and over the years developed a checklist for user experience and user research to make sure that the privacy of the user is first and foremost, right? And that a user researcher and someone working for the user experience of a tool, of an app, of a program or system are asking themselves the right questions to make sure that they're thinking about the practical security and privacy of the. It's really an honor for me to use my professional skills to assist folks. I had the honor of working with a lot of human rights defenders, journalists, lawyers in their fight to, for social justice and protecting the rights of people on the margins, people who've been pushed there for various reasons, marginalized communities, whether you're black or brown or queer folks, gender non-conforming folks, who just have different security needs. When developing personas, there's this idea in the title of this talk, protester as a persona. But it's important to remember that we don't need in this work a separate persona for dissidents and protesters, human rights defenders, and people fighting for social justice, civil society organizations, social justice leaders. It's important to remember that that group exists inside the personas that we come up with, whether they're users or people or clients, whatever it is. Some of those individuals are dealing with issues that impact them differently. And it's so important that the tools that we develop and that we work on address those issues and empower individuals, users. And it's so important that we empower users to protect themselves from the unique and different risks and threats that they face. What this might look like is when developing scenarios, saying, what about this type of user, or what about this type of use case, but adding the identity of a queer person, a black and brown person, a demonstrator, someone who's marginalized, a woman, because the other personas and the other ideas of who our users are and who's coming to these works cannot lack the intersection of what these identities cross upon, right? Whenever I'm thinking about measuring risk and threats, one of the first things I have to think about is the identity of this individual or organization and how that identity compounds, right, or safeguards them from certain risks and threats. To people who are considered otherly, suspicious, they're pushed out to the margins. Instead of asking and investigating and measuring, oftentimes we are eroding the privacy, surveilling, and targeting. And as we build technologies can be made in ways that protect marginalized communities and oppressed people, or technologies can be made in a way that they're weaponized against these very communities. And oftentimes, it's not with either intention, and that's the problem. If we don't intentionally balance technologies, leaning towards the idea of how can we think about the intersections and identities of our users and these use cases and personas that we're working on, then we introduce the possible risk of having a huge negative impact instead of a positive one. It's going to be a wonderful day today. I've been checking out the early speakers as well as the agenda for the rest of SOUPS 2020. And I just want to wish you all a great SOUPS 2020. Stay safe, make this world better, and thank you for your time. I just want to take time out to thank all of you who were recipients of the different grants, whether it was a diversity grant, a student grant. Diversity makes conferences better, it makes USENIX better, it makes security better, and of course it makes SOUPS better. And congratulations. Thank you for being here and have a wonderful day today.